You know what's strange? We talk endlessly about generations. We argue about boomers like they're villains in a story. We analyze millennials like a case study. We dissect Gen Z like they're a brand new psychological experiment. But there's one entire generation that almost never comes up. Not because they didn't matter, but because they never asked to be noticed. Generation X. Born roughly between the mid-1960s and early 1980s. They're your older co-workers who never complain. Your parents who seem oddly detached, but dependable. The people who helped build the modern world and then quietly stepped out of the spotlight. And here's the part no one really talks about. Their psychology may be the most misunderstood of any living generation. The empty house generation. To understand Gen X, you have to start with absence. Picture this. It's the late 1970s. You're 8 years old. School ends. You walk home alone. You open the door to an empty house. No phone in your pocket. No cameras. No way for anyone to check if you made it home safely. You make yourself a snack. You do your homework. You wait. By the early 1980s, millions of children were living this exact routine every single day. An entire generation quietly learning one lesson early. You can always count on someone being there. That empty house did something important. It didn't just create independence. It created psychological realism. Actions had consequences, real ones. There was no negotiating with reality. No long conversations about feelings. If you crossed a line, the response was immediate. Your brain learned something very specific. Cause and effect are directly connected. That wiring never really went away. It's why Gen X tends to think 3 steps ahead. Why they anticipate outcomes instinctively. Why they're rarely surprised by things going wrong. They learned early that life doesn't pause for explanations. When the rules stopped working, Gen X was raised on a promise. Work hard, follow the rules, stay loyal, and everything will work out. Then they watched that promise collapse. They saw record divorce rates tear through families. They watched parents give decades to companies, only to be laid off overnight. The rules didn't bend. They changed completely. So Gen X adapted. Psychologists might call it defensive pessimism. Gen X calls it being realistic. They don't expect disaster. They just expect instability. Hope quietly. Prepare privately. Because experience taught them something younger generations are still learning. Nothing is guaranteed. Why Gen X stays quiet online. People assume Gen X avoids social media because they don't get technology. That's wrong. They helped build the digital world. They just don't trust exposure. Gen X grew up when mistakes were temporary. Embarrassment faded. Memories stayed local. There were no viral moments. No permanent records. So when they see people broadcasting their lives to strangers, it doesn't feel exciting. It feels dangerous. Privacy, to Gen X, isn't secrecy. It's safety. The less people know about you, the less they can use against you. So they stay quiet. They watch. They don't overshare. Not because they're disconnected, but because they're cautious. Irony is armor. Gen X perfected emotional distance. Sarcasm. Dry humor. Irony. Not because they're cold, because humor became armor. They grew up during a time when adults talked about nuclear war like it was weather. Duck and cover drills. Cold War anxiety. The constant suggestion that everything could end at any moment. When authority figures tell you not to worry, while clearly being worried themselves, you learn to hold contradictions. You learn to keep a little emotional distance, just in case. The work ethic no one talks about. Gen X doesn't post about hustle. They don't brand productivity. They just work. Their first jobs came early, and they were real. Paper routes before sunrise. Fast food registers where mental math mattered. Jobs with responsibility, not resumes. They learned competence before confidence. And they watched what happened to loyalty. They saw corporations shed workers without hesitation. So they made a quiet decision: never trust systems. Trust skills. They don't rely on job titles. They rely on being valuable. Not flashy, not loud, just indispensable. Independent, but never alone. Here's the paradox. Gen X is fiercely independent. They won't ask for help. They'll figure it out themselves, like they always have. But if you need help, they show up. No announcements. No credit. That instinct comes from necessity. Friendships weren't optional growing up. They were survival networks. So Gen X learned collaboration without performance. Quiet loyalty. Unspoken understanding. Their relationship with authority. Gen X respects competence, not titles. If you know what you're doing, they'll follow you anywhere. If you don't, they have no patience. They watched authority fail repeatedly, politically, economically, morally. So they learned skepticism early, not rebellion, evaluation. Economic scars you don't see. Gen X has lived through repeated financial shocks, recessions, market crashes, layoffs. Stability never lasted long enough to trust. That's why many Gen Zers maintain multiple income streams. Not because they're chasing wealth, because they're avoiding vulnerability. They don't assume tomorrow will look like today. Self-reliance that cuts both ways. Gen X is exceptional in crisis. Calm, capable, focused. But that strength comes with a cost. Asking for help feels like failure, even when support exists. Not because they're isolated, but because independence became identity. How they learned differently. Before the internet, information had weight. You searched for answers physically. You earned knowledge. That effort changed how information was stored. What you worked for, you remembered. They fixed things because they had to. They learned systems because no one else would. It built confidence in problem solving. A belief that most things are fixable, if you're patient enough. How watching the world change. Now Gen X watches their children grow up differently. More supervision, more documentation, less solitude. They gave their kids what they never had. But sometimes they wonder if visibility has replaced resilience. Because to Gen X, being visible means being vulnerable. The bridge generation. Generation X isn't better. They're different. They grew up between two worlds, one fading, one unfinished. They are the bridge. And bridges don't get applause. They just hold everything together. Quietly, reliably, without asking to be noticed. And maybe that's the most Gen X thing of all. Not needing recognition. If this made you feel understood, or uncomfortable, or seen in a way you don't usually feel, you already know why. This is Psychora. We don't chase trends. We explore the mind. And if you want more deep dives like this, you know what to do.